Things are about to get real. I have Katherine Waller with us today. She is the author of Calling It Off, the memoir of the almost bride. And I am so excited to get into this conversation today because there are so many women that are unhappily married that maybe wish that they called it off a few weeks before their wedding. And there are a lot of people getting closer and closer to the date of getting married that maybe is on the calendar and they're not sure if it's cold feet or if it's the wrong relationship. So we're going to be diving into all of that today. So Katherine, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, it's such an honor. It's obviously a very personal and vulnerable story, but I'm so excited to go there and hopefully people can walk away feeling more empowered to trust their gut and listen to that intuition throughout this story.
I love it. And so for you, so this is a, as soon as I saw the cover of the book, as soon as I saw you on social media sharing about your book, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be a really good read." And it's bold because it's a bit of a taboo topic. I think anytime a woman does any type of big transformation or change, it's like there's some sort of shame involved in walking away from somewhere in our life where we're settling or it's not quite right. There's a lot of external judgment. And it's hard as sometimes people pleasers or those of us that want to, make everyone else comfortable around us to take these bold moves. So I would love to hear a little bit about your story of what made you decide, years after this incident, and I say this incident in quotation marks, this life change happened. What made you feel like it was time to write this book, and what's the why behind it?
So I really believe in the power of storytelling. I always have. It's how I've connected and processed. I've loved to write my whole life, but I never felt like I had a story that was going to be meaningful and impactful to people. So as I was going through this, literally the day after I called it off, I said, this is my story because I was looking for resources. I was looking for a conversation. I was looking for this book to just help me feel, even in the lead up, like, are these feelings normal? Am I alone? Is this shame normal? Like, what is happening, and why do I have nobody that I can talk to and connect with about this? And so when I was going through it, I was like, no, let me be that person. So I took some really terrible, terrible notes, lots of journaling of the raw account of all of that for about 6 months.
Mhm.
And then I put it on the shelf. I took a pause and realized I needed to be able to come back to it from a healed, processed, kind of grown place to be able to look back with a real honest reflection, my own part, the situation, and be able to pull out the meaningful lessons. Because just the step by step of what happened isn't the meaningful part and isn't the reason to tell the story. It's what I learned, it's how I grew, it's how the transformation happened on the other side and all of that healing. And so it did. I took a few years to let it marinate, let life evolve, and then come back from a more graceful place and open it back up and revisit it and really put in the juicy good bits. So that's why it took some time.
Mhm.
Um, but also I knew in the moment it was an important story to share.
Yeah, and I love that because you were looking up or feeling within yourself, is this normal? And sometimes behind that is, I know for me, anytime I've gone through some sort of transition or change or asking myself the question, is this normal? With any experience, is something wrong with me? Am I the only one going through this? And I was
Right.
reading the statistics in the book. You said there's about 20% of engagements are called off.
Yeah. 20% do not end in a marriage,
Right.
which is incredibly common, actually. And that means there's a lot of us walking around out there that called off an engagement, and then so many more relationships that are just as deep and difficult to walk away from that
Mhm.
don't quite make it to the engagement phase. And I
Mhm.
think walking away from that is equally as challenging. And so I think it's really applicable to anybody going through that relationship change, but also just a big life change in general. Those
Yeah.
big moments are so tumultuous and so scary and filled with shame and guilt and all of these emotions and pressures. And they're such an opportunity at the same time. So whatever that big change is, I really think that the book Calling It Off can speak to someone going through those moments.
Hmm. And I feel like so many of us who are going through big changes, or we feel that we need to go through a big change, we resist it, we push it off, we
Mhm.
squash it down. It turns into anxiety. It turns into, there must be something wrong with me. I need to fix myself. I need to do more personal development. That's actually something I hear a lot from people is I need to change myself to make this thing work. It could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be so many different things. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's just like radical acceptance of this isn't for me. So tell us a little bit about how you knew the difference between is this cold feet or is this not the right thing for me? How did you distinguish the difference between cold feet and this isn't the right thing for me? Because I know you waited 2 weeks until the wedding, which is,
I
the
did.
clock was ticking.
Literally. Well, I'll be honest, it took some time because I do think that self-doubt was really loud in the beginning and feeling like, no, 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 this is a me thing. I've got to work through this. The doubts aren't that bad. It's not that big of a deal. We want this outcome. The world tells us it's time to get married. I think so many of the things played into kind of purposefully ignoring that.
Hmm.
And I think I also think some relationship anxiety is normal. I think whatever your situation, I think it's normal to be nervous for a wedding, for a lifelong commitment. And I think if you can talk about that with a partner and come to a resolution and share really openly, that's a great way to look at that and be like, oh, this is very much cold feet. We're working through this in partnership, developing and growing together. But when you can't have that conversation, when those conversations aren't productive, that is one sign that maybe it's not just cold feet. Maybe you're tapping into something that is deeper and more meaningful. And also for me, it physically and emotionally felt so much bigger. It was so much heavier and deeper and all consuming than just, I'm nervous for the wedding.
Hmm.
Right? There was a deep-seated dread. There were physical manifestations of that. I could feel it throughout my entire body that this just was not the right path for me. And I still ignored that building for a very long time. It had to get to a certain level, like a critical mass almost, for me to finally listen and wake up and say, okay, no, like I hear you. I finally hear you, body. I finally hear you, gut. Like, I'm going to listen now and make the choice and prioritize me, essentially, no matter that outcome, even though I hate the hurt that it's going to cause.
Right. And I think that's an interesting thing too. It's choosing yourself over choosing, potentially short term, not hurting someone else's feelings. There's a quote that says, what's good for you is good for everyone, or what's good for one is good for everyone. And when I think of this situation of you calling it off and honoring your intuition, you honored your intuition. And now you're in a completely different space, and so is this person. So it's actually
Hmm.
such a gift. um, can you talk a little bit more about how your body was physically talking to you? Because I know everyone's body speaks differently, and a lot of the time there's a through line with these as well. So I'd love for you to dive a little bit more into that.
Yeah, so I do think it's important to acknowledge, like you said, everybody's body reacts to an unaligned situation, a major life stress, a
Mhm.
big no, if you will, in a different way. But the important thing is realizing your own personal patterning and understanding your own kind of symptoms in that way. For me, it's headache, clenching jaw, jaw tension, sleeplessness, racing heart, and then just a feeling of contraction and
Mhm.
feeling so physically, emotionally closed in,
Mhm.
and unable to open and ground into the world. And so I could see that through time and it ebbed and flows. I mean, there's obviously good times within that roughly 1 year period that we were planning. Sometimes it was a distraction, but it came and went until it got to a place of I really couldn't ignore it. I didn't sleep for weeks. I had headaches that wouldn't let up. I mean, it was pretty significant because I wasn't listening. But what an I view it now as what an opportunity and what a gift that my body was really willing to kind of tell me all out how we were feeling until I finally acknowledged it. But the wonderful thing now, and something I still practice every single day, is checking in on how my body feels. It's one of the three main questions I ask myself. It's a resource on my website, completely free, just to try to help in these moments. But checking into how I feel now, now that I know my patterns, is a really, really quick answer of when I'm feeling out of alignment,
Mhm.
right? Because I know what it feels like. I've kept tabs on it. I had a huge no. I know what that feels like. And so as I've paid attention over time and gotten to know myself better, I can feel that a lot sooner. And I
Mhm.
think it's really such a skill to develop, particularly as a woman, to be able to tune in and check in on that body and see how you're feeling and where, especially as you're thinking through those decision points. Like as you're thinking, I'm getting married, how does that feel? As
Mhm.
you're thinking, I'm going to call it off, terrifying it as it is, that felt lighter and
Mhm.
safer and more of a release and so much more calm and comfortable that it was like, okay, it's scary, but it's true. And so that's kind of how I was able to figure out what my own body was telling me and then now practice it every day moving forward.
And one thing that you said that I find really important there is to know our patterns. So if you
Hmm.
know what your patterns are in life, maybe it's people pleasing, maybe it's ignoring your intuition or putting your someone else's truth above your own, or maybe you have a tendency of running away from every type of relationship and it's literally been a pattern every single moment, and maybe you just need to sort some of that out, go to therapy and realize, okay, I have some wounds here because of my parents or my background. So I love the pattern piece because where
Hmm.
it can get a little bit confusing for some people is this intuition, or is this just a fear or a pattern that I have? And I
Hmm.
think that's something that only you, the person going through it, can really get to the bottom of. But I think knowing our patterns is important.
I also don't think intuition feels fearful, right? Like, I think when it's really from our intuition, from our gut, from our knowing, I don't think it's a time constrained, panic inducing feeling. I think there's a level of calm and, again, that knowing and a little bit of a deeper groundedness that is not, it might be a scary situation, but that feeling of what you know you need to do
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't bring panic with it. I think that's a really interesting way to that I try to distinguish
Mm-hmm.
is, yeah, the situation might be scary, but how is the feeling of the decision? Does that
Mm-hmm.
decision bring panic or does that decision bring peace? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where I've been able to again distinguish between the fear and the conditioning and the true intuition.
Really powerful. It's interesting as I reflect on when I got married. I got married when I was very young. I was 23 and I was with him since I was 19, and we were together until my late 20s. I had a lot of moments in time where my body was saying no, but I didn't have enough data of my own
Mhm.
intuition to trust myself. Because I was always the person that was making sure everyone else was good. So I was not in tune with all of the signs and symptoms until one day I got really sick and my body's like, you have to change your life. And I did, but it wasn't until I completely like broke down that I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I just felt like my body shut down. And that was the moment I had to get away from my logical mind of like, well, I've been in this relationship for 8 years. I've invested so much time. My family knows this person. Like, there's so many things that I've heard from women because I've coached women in the past, not specifically on their relationships, but that are in relationships where they're not happy or in something that they're not happy. And they're like, well, I've just spent so much time. Like, I don't want to start over again. What are some of the other things that potentially could get in the way, or maybe were showing up for you as reasons to not call it off before you finally got real with yourself?
Well, I think that the time commitment already invested is a really important one to acknowledge. I mean, it's literally a sunk cost, I think. And the thing that I think about is there's a cost either way, right? Like there's a cost to stay and continue investing in this. There's also a cost to leave. Both are high, but which one's going to lead to the ultimately happier outcome? Because you're going to pay a cost either way. And so that was one way I kind of helped remove that lie, that fallacy. But I think there are so many other ways, specifically as women, that we internalize these lies and lie to ourselves that the only way we have value is as a wife and a mother, that it has to happen by 25 or 30, depending on where you grew up, or you're a failure, that it's never going to happen for you if you are past your sell by date, that somehow we are only good when we serve others, when we please others, and it's selfish to make
Mm-hmm.
choices for ourselves. I think all of those bits, particularly for me, were pieces that kind of pushed me down the line of a relationship I knew was not meant for marriage, but I really just didn't see any other way. I, like you, was a people pleaser. I was the oldest daughter, an achiever. I thought that's how I was going to be successful in the world as a woman. And to look down the barrel of that and be like, no, I actually need to purposely fail in order to reclaim my life, or fail in the eyes of the world to then reclaim my life and make it authentic and true to me. That was a big pill to swallow. But
Mm-hmm.
on the other side, like I have taken up those lies never again. Like I just don't internalize them anymore because I
Mm-hmm.
had to walk away from them in order to, take my own life back.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's more important about whether or not you like yourself versus everyone
Hmm.
else liking you. Because if you're liked, if everyone likes you all the time, are you fully in your truth potentially? Are you fully living an authentic life? So, how is the breakdown? I do want to hear the breakdown. I want to hear your experience of it. Did you bring this up to him ahead of time and it was shut down? Was it gaslit? Because, like, you did mention that earlier. So, what was the process? You did mention if you can have a constructive conversation with your partner about it and work through it together. So, what was that like for you? And tell us a little bit about that.
So, for the most part, I did not talk about my feelings with almost anybody.
Right.
I
Not
didn't tell
even
my
your
friends,
therapist.
not even my therapist. I have a whole chapter in the book on therapy, which I really believe in. But the point being, you have to be fully open, honest, and transparent in order for that to work. And I wasn't for
Mhm.
months and months and months throughout this time. Towards the end, Mr. X, which is how I refer to him in the book, he and I did go to couples therapy and tried. We obviously acknowledged that there were challenges and problems in our relationship. We were trying to work through them. I think that the concept of doubt was inherent in that, but did we sit down and me be open and say, I'm really having doubts about our wedding? No, I didn't. I didn't give that opportunity. I don't think it would have changed anything in our situation because we
Mhm.
were failing at therapy anyway. Um, but you know, being open and transparent, I think, again, I actually don't think it would have saved us. We couldn't get through that communication and we're so
Mhm.
misaligned.
Mhm.
Uh, but no, I did not give that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I forget who said this. This was not too long ago, but somebody said it was on the internet. If you're always being triggered in your relationship, it's probably a sign that you're not aligned or you're not compatible. Um, and if things aren't changing in core areas of your life. And one thing that came up for me, this is a long time ago, I never really looked at values. I never
Mm,
really looked at like, what are my core values until maybe, 7 years ago. So I never thought, what are my core values? What's really important to me? And I feel like a lot of us get into relationship because we feel a certain way. Like we're like, oh, they're so
mhm,
fun, or they're so this, or they're the complete opposite of my last partner. Pendulum swing, but we don't really look at the values and the alignment. And so when things are out of alignment, it's you can't really bring them into alignment if the foundations don't fit. So
mhm.
that's interesting as well. So with that being said, what are some questions? I know in your freebie, you have a freebie for the listeners today. What are some questions? I know you have three questions. What's one question that someone can ask themselves whether or not a relationship is potentially for them? A question that you asked yourself.
Mhm. So again, I revisit these constantly, and it's not just for relationship, but the one that feels most relevant to what we're talking about today, and I think one that's like a quick hit is a forced decision situation, right? So as you're sitting there thinking about it, giving a quantitative number, so giving a percentage to, for me, it was if I had to call off my wedding today, what percentage of me would want to stay? and what percentage of me would want to call it off. And I asked myself that on a daily basis. And those numbers waffled greatly. I mean, some days it was like, no, 95% get married, 5% walk away. Other days it was 10% get married, 90% walk away. And I think the important part of that is not that I ever got to 100% walk away. Like I never, in my mental games, I never got there until the
Hmm.
moment that I made a decision, but it made the decision less scary. It let me try on potential decisions and make small temporary non-commitment decisions to see how that felt, to see
Hmm.
how I would handle that, to play it out and to role play it in my own head, to do it in therapy. We talked about this a lot in therapy, but it took everything that was swirling around in my brain and was so amorphous and forced me to bring it down into an objective numerical value and really make a small, albeit temporary decision that ultimately let me make a big one by making the small practice ones through time. And I think that is a really powerful step because you're not committed to it. You're thinking it through, but it tells you a lot about how you're feeling.
Hmm.
You know, if you force yourself to really put a number to it, it tells you a lot, and you might surprise yourself at what comes out when you actually put a number to it.
And I love that because that can be used for anything. Do I
Anything.
stay? Do I go? Do I move to this location or do I not? It can really be for any decision. So I really love that. So, who did you become as a result of walking away? And like, how are you different as a
Mhm.
person as a result of choosing yourself and going through the fire, essentially? And, walking away from, 300 people that were supposed to be at your wedding.
Well, immediately after the fact, I was a disaster.
Right.
And I think that's really fair to say. Like, it was a true breakdown. I was heartbroken. Had friends and family who were heartbroken. I think that immediate aftermath was was kind of a mess. And
Hmm.
and yet it tore everything apart to let me rebuild it purposely, right? So I got to look back and see how I act in that relationship and say what I didn't like because I didn't love how I showed up in the relationship all the time either. It
Hmm.
let me take stock of what I wanted in a partner and get really crystal clear on what was going to be a yes and a no. And then in the book, I also detail, my first few romantic forays after that. And it was great practice to very quickly say, oh, no, this is also unaligned. And now I'm going to hold the line a lot sooner. Now I'm going to walk away the second I know that
Hmm.
because I have belief in myself and what I want and what I deserve. And so it was great practice then moving forward. And I just got really clear on who I wanted to show up as and what I valued in my future goals in my life, in a partnership. Um, and I just became really picky, for lack of a better word, and
Hmm.
super, super firm in my boundaries of what was for me and what wasn't, and what was going to serve me and what wasn't. And it also, to publicly disassemble your life forces you to then show back up in a way that strips down the performance and to
Hmm.
just show up authentically. And that includes like on Instagram, right? Because we had this beautiful, perfect relationship that I painted a very nice picture publicly. And then when it collapsed, it was like, what a waste of time and effort to make this facade. And so
Hmm.
to come on the other side and be so much less concerned with outside opinions and just show up really real, faults and all,
Hmm.
disaster of a life and all, that was really, really powerful for me.
I love that, especially around the authenticity and the putting on a
Mhm.
show. I was in conversation with someone recently and they're like, I'm a very authentic person with like basically everything to like people close to me. With discernment, I don't share everything,
Mm, of
but
course.
but I'm a very open book to people in my life
Hmm.
and I was like, yeah, that's just like the truth about this and that. And people who, what I found is people who make everything look perfect. They're usually the ones with the most dysfunction behind the curtains. And I'm not saying that's always the case because
Yeah.
that's not always the case. And I will say that some of the people that I've known in my life who have had the perfect life externally, like in the personal development space or super external, and they're like, great, great, good vibes only. Behind the scenes, it's an absolute mess. So I love the alignment of authenticity and truth. And I know for me, when I went through my divorce like 7, 8 years ago, I had a big collapse of my image as well. It wasn't so
Mhm.
much like external social media. I wasn't creating a perfect painting of him and I, but just I was putting on a show of this is who I am. And then I had to really discover who I really was outside of that relationship and starting a new career, and it led to a more authentic, loving path for myself that wasn't so external, and that was really the gift for me.
I also think it changes your relationships with friends and family,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like to finally be open and honest and show up in whatever messy truth it is,
Mm-hmm.
forces conversations with friends and family that either moves your relationship forward. You become more open about everything, closer through everything, more supportive and supported through everything, or you maybe need to trim some of those branches, right? I think the relationships, not only to myself, but to other people, were so much deeper after this and so much more truthful
Mm-hmm.
because it was finally everything was out in the open. And the way that I was met with grace and the truth that then they came back to me with, I mean, it just deepened our friendships and my relationship with my family to a whole nother level, which I'm so grateful for.
I love this. I was just talking a little bit about this in the last episode around spiritually aligned chaos that I talk a little bit about in my book. And it came up recently when I was on someone's show. And I was like, oh, yeah, spiritually aligned chaos. I talk about that. It's when God in the universe is like, we're going to like upheaval everything that you've created that's false. And you better let go, so that you can actually see what's true and what's left and what's
Mhm.
for you. And I love that you just shared that through the friendships, the relationships, and also the piece around authenticity and cutting the branches. And so, one last piece before we start to wrap up the conversation is, how is the relationship that you're now in, when, because you are married, you do have a child, all those
Yes.
things. How is that like night and day potentially from your previous engagement? Like, just to give a little bit of a flavor, an essence of it.
Yeah. So, calling it off, it actually ends the night I meet my current husband, who is lovely and delightful. And I met him about 6 months after I was supposed to be married. So, not a huge time chronologically, but huge in terms of growth and evolution as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I will say, like when we met, I was so open and honest. I literally told him about the book the first night we met. I'm like, hey, this is what I just went through. I'm gonna write a book about it someday. So if you're on board with that, cool. But like this is a big messy part of my story, and here's where I am. I told him the first night, didn't scare him off, thank the Lord. But it just, there was an ease and an alignment in that relationship where I had figured out what I wanted, and so had he. He had done his own, he'd been through his own relationships and determined what he wanted. And we fell into a really easy, happy, and calm relationship. And one interesting point is, I did have two proposals. I then had a wedding that I planned a second wedding and actually went through with this one. But the proposals themselves, I mean, my first proposal, which is detailed in the book, was in Champagne, France. And it was this incredible, movie worthy, perfect proposal. And from my proposal with my husband, oddly also in France, but like kind of a chaotic mess. Like he had hired this photographer who came out and kind of like ruined the surprise. And then my husband like threw the ring box and was like, "Oh my gosh, marry me." And it just was this perfectly easy and kind of messy, happy time. And the feeling of an immediate yes and elation was so different from a feeling of immediate second guessing. I mean,
Mm.
I have these counterpoints of my first thoughts, my first feelings. And so it was so easy to then continue forward planning our wedding where the focus was the relationship and the love and not on something big and over the top. I mean, it was beautiful. Don't get me wrong. I
Mhm.
loved our wedding, but it was smaller and it was just people we loved and adored. And it was really limited and really beautiful and focused on us. So I got to have confirmation on a regular basis that this was different.
Powerful. This story really is about trusting your gut, stepping away from what is not aligned, listening to the ways your body is speaking to you, and knowing that the body is always giving you signs. And knowing that it's never too late to start over,
Mhm.
it's never too late to attract the right person, no matter what age you are. And it's okay to call it off, whatever that thing is, or to make a big leap. And as we start to wrap up, is there any last messages that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I think the main pieces are just I really it's so powerful to take the time to develop that self-trust. It is worth it. It is the number one place you should be able to go for your decisions in your life. It is what is most true. So really take the time to develop that and walk away, I think, feeling empowered and aligned to make the best steps for you throughout your life. And also to those who are in a more uncomfortable place, who are in a big change and a crossroads, like there is hope on the other side. The transition is never as long or as scary as we think it's going to be. And the potential and the opportunity on the other side is so unbelievably worth it. Whatever that looks like, it's worth it.
Powerful. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited for the listeners to grab a copy of Calling It Off. This is on Audible. You can also grab it on Amazon. Highly recommend reading it. And when you do, make sure to follow Katherine on social media and leave a review. Thank you so much for being here. She also has a link to 3 questions you can ask yourself to help support you to get into alignment and clarity on decision making. And I know that anyone who's in a relationship that they're like, should I stay? Should I go? They're, potentially already married, or maybe they're trying to make a decision around any type of big life decision. This episode is going to give them so much value. So, Katherine, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my honor and pleasure. Thank you.